Welcome to another episode of Parallax. With just a few days to go for the final polling date for this year's US elections, there's a whole flurry of speculations about who's going to occupy the White House for the next 4 years. Is it going to be President Donald Trump or is it going to be former Vice President Joe Biden? It's a fact that whenever Americans go to the ballot box, the world sits up and takes notice. But this time the elections are happening in a particularly unique context, and not just because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the intense ideological polarization that 4 years of a Donald Trump presidency triggered. Today we have with us Dr. Amit Gupta, who's an associate professor at the US Air War College. And I have Dr. Gupta with me so that I can pick his brains on what the domestic situation in the US currently is. Dr. Gupta is a very keen observer of American politics, and I have seen that at close quarters. So I'm hoping he'll be able to help us make sense of some of the complexities around the political sentiments and sort of the popular narrative around the elections in the United States at the moment. Welcome to the show, Dr. Gupta, and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Angshuman. As always, it's good to talk to you and to talk to IPCS. So, go
Thank
ahead,
you.
please.
Dr. Gupta, I'll just begin with a very broad question and then I'll come to the specifics later. What do you feel broadly about this year's elections, given the sort of, if I may, head-turning 4 years that President Donald Trump has had in the White House, and all the discussions and the attention that the United States has got in the 4 years? Do you think this year's election is somewhat different from the rest of the elections?
It is different, and it's different firstly for the two things you said. With COVID now, COVID is the main issue in the country. And I was just checking on the news, 227,000 Americans have died this year. And they're saying that the spike will only keep going up over the next 6 weeks or so, or in the next 8 weeks. The second thing is, yes, there's very high levels of polarization. But, to get to your point, here's the thing. The German sociologist Max Weber used to say there's 3 types of authority: religious authority, charismatic authority, and rational legal authority. And Trump is charismatic authority. It's the kind of personality that draws people, inspires people. The problem is charismatic authority eventually runs out of steam. And what you need instead is rational legal authority. And I'll give you a very good example of this. If you look at Germany, Germany has never had a charismatic leader except for Adolf Hitler. And that one didn't work too well for the Germans. But if you look at Angela Merkel, she's not charismatic. She's a PhD in chemistry. She's a technocrat. She's a bit boring, but she's a very good leader because she has a very strong set of institutions and a very good set of rules governing those institutions. So, as my German friends point out, Germany has 6 times the number of doctors that Italy has, and it has 4 times the number of doctors that Britain has. That is why it was able to cope better than either of those countries with COVID. And in essence, I think, to answer your question, what Americans are now looking for is less charisma and more rational legal authority. Because charisma after time gets tiring. In early October, and it seems like it was a year ago, first we found out about Trump's tax returns, and he pays less in taxes than I do. Then came the debate where everybody was shouting at everybody. And then he got COVID-19. And this all happened within 5 days. So just when you were recovering from the tax return, you have the debate. When you're just recovering from the debate, you're having the COVID case. And what I'm trying to say is, I think people want a presidency and people want an American governmental system that works and one which doesn't have constant breaking news uh, effects, which are going to sort of upset the equilibrium. So I think that is really the thing there. There's one more thing about this election. This election is bringing out just how obsolete the American democratic system is. Between the electoral college, so Joe Biden could win 4 million votes, then Donald Trump gets elected. That sort of makes a mockery of democracy. The fact that mail-in ballots is so problematic. I'll give you an example. I went last Friday to do a mail-in ballot. The line stretched for about 3/4 of a kilometer. And then I asked them, I said, so how do we go about this? First, you have to fill out a request for a ballot. And you have to justify why you need an absentee ballot. Then you fill out your ballot. Then somebody has to witness your ballot. I said, this is going to take 2 hours. Now you compare this with voting in New Delhi, where people go straight up to the booth, give their vote and come. My mother is 86 years old. At the last election in 2019, the volunteers came, took her to the polling station, made sure she voted, and brought her back home. And it was all over in half an hour. So there are a lot of things where America needs to be able to reform. And you can't reform the Constitution. I'll add one more thing to this. Because you have 2 parties, you have this intensity of polarization. If you had 3, 4, 5 parties, people's ideological motives could have fitted better into other categories. And so what is happening in America now is at the national level, you only have 2 choices, Democrat and Republican. But at the city council level, you can vote for a Green Party candidate, a socialist candidate, so on. And that is where you're seeing the most progressive stuff happening in America. So Seattle has raised the minimum wage. It doubled it from $8 an hour to $15 an hour. LA doubled its minimum wage from $8 an hour to $15 an hour. And now there is a push to do that in New York. So the most innovative stuff in America is not happening through the national leadership. It's happening through the local leadership. And the hope in this is that there is a huge generational change coming in America. Okay. In the next 10 years, 70% of the workforce, or 75% of the workforce, will be millennials. That's people born between 1981 and 1996. Okay. Now, these people have very different political views. They believe that government should help people. They believe in universal healthcare. They believe in inclusion, so on. So the point they make to me is, we're not worried about this election. Just remember in 2024, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will be 35, and she can run for president. And that will be interesting to see who comes up in succeeding years, because this old American model is not going to last. So you're absolutely right. This is fundamentally, this is a crazy election. It's got global interest, but also the thing is that the choice now has become, you can go with charismatic Trump, or you can go with rational, legal Biden. But you're not going to see the kind of changes that your generation would want. I'd put it that way.
Right. It's interesting how you talked about how some of the issues probably are going to be different in the next elections. It almost seems like, substantively speaking, it's almost like a crossover election, or a crossover election between 2 generations, if I may put it that way. In that vein, Dr. Gupta, can you tell me 3 big issues that American voters care about in these elections? Because a lot of things have happened in the past 4 years, from talks about unemployment, job losses, racial justice, etc. But of all of them, what are the 3 big issues that Americans care about in this election?
It's 3 things. I think COVID, because the American healthcare system has not worked as well as it should. The economy, because the trends, and I can talk about that if you want me to. The trends look like the next 4 to 6 months are not going to be good. And then the third one really is what you said, it's race. After George Floyd was choked to death, after the case of the young man who was shot 7 times in the back, after the case of Breonna Taylor, there is an understanding in America that race is still a problem. So, even the most conservative people say we need to look at this issue. We cannot sit there and say, oh yeah, we solved all our racial differences. But I would say this, how you go about it, there's no clear idea. There's always this talk of let's build a commission after the election on race. Commissions will do nothing. There has to be a clear agenda, platform, so on. That is not coming. That will come from the next generation. So those are the three that I would say would be the most important.
Right. Dr. Gupta, I want to talk a bit about the number game here. As we know, most of the national polls have given Joe Biden, I would say, a comfortable lead, about on an average 10 percentage point lead over Donald Trump. But we know those numbers ultimately might not matter on the polling day. We saw what happened in 2016 with Hillary Clinton. She too was clocking high figures nationally. But given the electoral college system, ultimately some of the key swing states went for Trump, turned red, and which got President Donald Trump into the White House. Do you see a repeat of that happening? Is it going to go down to the wire this time? Because as we know, I think some of the Midwest key states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, it seems like they are the focus right now for both candidates, and it is these states that are going to decide the final outcome. So do you see a repeat of a 2016-like situation?
Let me put it this way. It would be arrogant for me to say that no, because there are enough people in America now saying that one thing may come out of this election, that polling becomes irrelevant in the future. Because what happened in the last election was people said, oh yeah, we support Hillary, or we're undecided, but they were all going to vote Trump. They just didn't say it to a pollster. So nobody's quite sure of the accuracy of these polls. The pollsters say that they're very accurate. The other thing with the national one is exactly what you're pointing out. If you win California, New York, Illinois, you won the national vote, because what's going to come in America is in the next 20 years, 8 states will have 50% of the population. 8 states will have 50% of the population. So you can win the popular vote very easily. Electorally, here's the thing. To answer your question specifically, I think you have to look state by state. In Wisconsin, there are 2 problems. One, the agricultural policy towards China hurt the farmers. 2, they were supposed to get this big 13,000 people Foxconn plant, which was going to make high-tech stuff. That plant employs 100 people. So there's a shortfall of 12,900. And, and third, there is this feeling that the ability to deal with COVID was very bad. So in Wisconsin, the people who voted for Trump, a large number of them have moved away. Women voters are moving away. In Michigan, the thing with Biden is Biden and Obama saved General Motors and Chevrolet. So they remember that. And that support is there. 90,000 people in Michigan did not vote either for the president or for Hillary or for Trump. Those people are now saying, now we will vote. So there are certain positive indicators there. I think there's some interesting states. Florida, nobody knows. It could go either way, depending on how many people turn out to vote, even though there's been a very large number of things. Arizona is one to look at. Arizona goes Republican typically, but this time around, in many of the big cities, it looks like Biden is favored. Georgia, the Democrats think they have a chance. I would put it this way, Anshuman. The core problem for the Trump presidency is they said they would deliver jobs, and those jobs never came. You know, we have a Mercedes-Benz plant, which is about 100 kilometers from where I live. That Mercedes-Benz plant is expanding. They're putting in a new billion-dollar plant. They're only going to employ 300 people because it's going to be all robotics. Now, that's great that you're putting a billion-dollar plant in, but that does nothing for employment. So the trend is towards automation, robots. It's not towards human labor. So the big problem then becomes, if you can't deliver jobs, if you can't deliver healthcare, what can you deliver? Now, there are certain people in all these states who love Trump because he shook things up. And what you have to understand with those people is very interesting. They say, no, we know he can't change things. But we also know that the Democrats can't change things. But at least this man is authentic. And people around the world don't understand economic disparity in America. The Federal Reserve of America did a survey a few years back and found out in the event of an emergency, 40% of Americans cannot put together $400. Okay, that's what, 28,000 rupees. The Census Bureau did another survey. They said in the event of an emergency, 60% of Americans cannot put together $1,000, which is 70,000 rupees. So, and then on the other hand, you see the billionaire class in America. The disparities are so wide now that in a lot of these states, the vote cannot be on the economy. It is going to be emotional, so on. And, you know, the conservative right, as there's an American commentator by the name of Anand Giridhar Das, who you must have seen. Anand Giridhar Das says this. He says, look, the conservatives would never tolerate somebody like Donald Trump in their church. They would never tolerate somebody like Donald Trump in their in their softball league. They would never invite him home for a barbecue. But because they hate the liberals and the progressives so much, they tolerate this. But the thing is that a lot of the people in the middle are moving in the other direction. So yeah, the Electoral College is flawed. And I will say this, because this is the note of hope here. Time is on the side of the millennials. It's not on the side of the baby boomers. The first baby boomers were born in 1945. The last were born in 1964. And I just gave a talk in the morning in Portugal, to a university in Portugal. And I pointed this out to them. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is 31 this year. Okay. Average American woman lives to be 85. So let's say she lives for 55 years more. She will live till 2075. Sanna Marin, the Prime Minister of Finland, is 34. Finns live to be 85. She will live till, add another 50 years to her life, 2070. Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand, is 38, 39. She will live to be 85. Add another 35 years to her life. She will live to be 2055. And Greta Thunberg, the Swedish environmentalist, is 17. If she lives to be 85, she will live till 2090. For Donald Trump to live till 2090, he'll have to be 144. Time is on the side of progressive people who care about the environment, who want social justice, who want equality, who want inclusiveness. I can go down the list on this. And you tell me, how long can you hold back the wheel of change? You can't, because it's people like this who will be, I mean, you think about, how old are you now, Angshuman?
I'm 20. I'm going to turn 28 next year.
You're going to 28. So let me put it to you this way. By the time Greta Thunberg is 40, you will be 50. And in that period of time, 22 years, imagine the impact of Greta Thunberg and environmentalists like her around the world. And in 22 years, Donald Trump will be 96. I mean, just to put this in perspective, you know, America did not vote for a progressive this time on the Democratic side. It voted for a safe person. If they had gone progressive, they would have gone with my hero, Bernie Sanders, or they would have gone with Elizabeth Warren. They didn't want that. The Democratic Party is very much like the Republican Party. It's centrist, you know. But your generation all went and voted for Bernie. Now, Bernie will be 82 at the next election. So much that I love him, he's not going to be the one coming up. It'll be Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or somebody like that. And your generation will understand a 35-year-old woman. They won't understand a 75-year-old man. You see what I'm saying here? So my own sense is, if you look at the Electoral College, I think there are hopeful signs in places like Wisconsin, Michigan, who knows about Pennsylvania. Arizona may be the one which is an outlier. So that is where the Democrats hope that they can achieve results.
Dr. Gupta, you spoke about this earlier, but I wanted to explore this in a little more detail. The COVID situation, it's something that we can't ignore at the moment. Firstly, I want to ask you, we have seen a massive amount of early voting this time in the US. In fact, in some states like Texas, I believe 85% have already voted.
Was it?
Yes. So sweeping numbers we are seeing from across the country. Do you think the COVID situation has a role to play in this somewhere? That people are choosing not to huddle on a single day on the 3rd of November and rather, you know, vote in a staggered manner beforehand, or choose to vote through mail-in ballots. My second question would be, how do you see this early voting situation? According to you, does it favor either candidate, Biden or Trump? Because I have read analysis which gives an advantage to both, and it's very ambivalent. So how do you read that situation?
Okay, on the COVID one, look, yes, a lot of people are saying, if you really want to be in a super spreader situation, go and stand in line on election day. If you didn't get COVID, you'll definitely get COVID. So that's certainly one part. Another part is, you know, people have been really energized in this election. These numbers are remarkable. And in fact, I would hope, if the Democrats win, that they make a push to make voting easy and electronic. I mean, why is it that I can't sit on my computer, go through, you know, here's my login code, whatever, and put in my vote? It should be so easy to do, especially in a technologically advanced country. You know, we are not a country where the ratio of computers is 1:10,000. So this could be done very easily. COVID enthusiasm, because people see this as a very important election. Now, a large number of Democrats have voted, but a large number of Republicans have also voted. There's no doubt about it. The belief, though, is more Republicans will show up at the polling booth on November 3rd than Democrats, because the Democrats have already banked their vote through the mail. So what they're talking about is the red mirage. The red mirage being that because you see a line full of Republicans on election day, you sit there and go, oh my God, it's going to be a big electoral sweep for the Republicans. And then the mail-in ballots come in and things start to balance off. You know? But I agree with the analysis, which is both sides are enthusiastic, both sides have put in a lot of votes. So don't see this as favoring the Democrats. the way some optimists are looking at it.
Right. That makes sense. Dr. Gupta, what about the Supreme Court appointment situation here, with Amy Coney Barrett firmly elected to the Supreme Court? Is that going to push up numbers for Trump, or is it just a dud? It's something that registered Republican voters had already expected, and hence voter patterns won't change, or is it going to have a dramatic impact across the board?
You see, you have to, the way the American public talk about the Supreme Court, they make it sound like it's all about abortion, you know, or gay marriage or whatever. Those are very small percentages of what the Supreme Court looks at. A lot of what the Supreme Court looks at is corporate issues, business issues, so on. And in that way, having a 6-3 majority is terrific for big business, for the Republican Party, so on. Okay, it's less so for social conservatives, because social conservatives already had a 5-4 majority. You know, so the point though is this: what happens to abortion? Because that is the big one. And I would tend to believe that what you've seen in America is Amy Coney Barrett didn't give Trump an electoral boost, because people said we already have a majority. Even if you put a liberal Democrat in there, it's still 5-4. It doesn't change anything. 6-3 doesn't make it different. You need 5-4.
Do you think, I'm sorry to interrupt, on this particular point,
no.
Is there also an element of replacing someone so fiercely liberal like Ruth Bader Ginsburg with your own appointee? Does that sentimentally play into the Republican or conservative voter base somewhere?
It plays into the Democratic category. See, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is a very interesting case, and I'll get back to abortion in a minute. Let me write it down so I don't forget it. Look, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg was appointed in the 90s by the Clinton administration, she was not notorious RBG. Nobody knew who this woman was. Even though she'd done outstanding legal work, nobody knew who she was. The reason she did so, her appointment went through so quickly, was her husband, Marty Ginsburg, is one of America's most famous tax lawyers. So every corporation went in and told the Republicans, we don't care what you think, this one has to go through. Because Marty Ginsburg had done so much good work for all the big corporations in America. Yeah? So you're going to be nice to his wife. And the thing was, she became notorious RBG only in the last 10 years or so. That this huge liberal credentials of Ruth. And she became an iconic hero for all kinds of people. You know, you can buy RBG t-shirts, which is like you can buy Captain America t-shirts. So, and probably just as popular. But the thing is, her death upset a lot of progressive liberal people, and especially progressive liberal women, who feel that the Supreme Court now has swung too far to the right. And therefore, that's certainly impacting a lot of coming out and voting. See, a lot of these progressive liberals didn't like Hillary Clinton. So they said, we'll vote for everybody else, we won't vote for the president. Those people are now saying, now we understand the mistake we made. We better go out and vote. But the thing which is interesting in the American context, which people don't get, is, you know, on abortion, the old law on abortion was, there was a New York law, there was an Alabama law, there was a California law. And all of them were different. They had different levels of strictness on whether you could have an abortion or not. In some cases, it was 0. In some cases, under certain circumstances. What will happen is, if Roe versus Wade is overturned, it goes back to the states. So states like Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama will say under no circumstances. States like New York, Illinois, California will say yes. The only problem is the minute you start saying under no circumstances, a lot of corporations will run away from your state. Because corporations have women executives who say, I'm not staying here, for obvious reasons. The other thing is there will be a lot of activism against your states. And I'll give you an example. Georgia passed a very severe pro-life, anti-abortion law. Georgia is now the second Hollywood. You know, Walking Dead, The Avengers, they're all made in Georgia now. A lot of the Hollywood types told the people, the politicians in Georgia, if you let this bill go through, we'll pull all our movie funding from Atlanta. And I mean, you've seen an Avengers movie. Have you seen the credits at the end? It's 15,000 names get mentioned in those credits till they show you that last 30-second action piece with Captain America. To get you sitting there, they make you go through 15,000 credits. That's a lot of jobs. And the other part in this is, look, as I said, by 2040, 8 states will have 50% of the population. Where do you think women are going to go? They're not going to go to states, and especially because for the last 40 years, more American women have got college degrees than American men. This is something very interesting. And if you cannot get young women, single or married, to come into your states, you have a lot of trouble. You have a lot of trouble. Now, put all this together and look at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court can do it. The only problem is nobody has looked at what the consequences are, because the people who want to get rid of Roe versus Wade think that the same law will apply in Alabama and it will apply in New York. And that's not true. It'll be different laws with different degrees of strictness and so on. But the economic impact will be the one to look for. And Amy Barrett, as I keep pointing out, the real thing is how much easier do they make it for corporations in America to do business, to be deregulated, so on. And that is a matter of major concern to progressives. I'll give you one story coming out of Seattle, which gives you some idea why corporations are so concerned about the progressive movement in America. In Seattle City Council, a few years ago, they elected a Marathi American woman, Indian American woman. I don't like using Marathi, Gujarati American. I leave that to the Gujaratis. They specialize in that one. No. This Indian American woman's name is Shama Sawant. And Shama Sawant ran for the Seattle City Council saying two things. I'm a socialist and I want a $15 minimum wage. She got elected, first socialist to be elected to Seattle City Council since I think about 1906. Seattle now has a $15 minimum wage. She ran for re-election. Amazon had its candidate to defeat her. That candidate got 5 times the money Shama Sawant got. Shama Sawant won again. So ask me, why does Amazon want to unseat a city council member? That is like saying that you want to get rid of, whoever is the member for Patel Nagar or Chittaranjan Park in Delhi, or Kalkaji in Delhi, from the city council. Nobody in India looks at city council elections. It's okay, do what you do. But Amazon took that seriously because they said today it's $15 minimum wage. Tomorrow it'll be healthcare. We don't know what's coming next. And this is why the Supreme Court matters, that you can strike down things which hurt business profitability. So keep that in mind. Abortion's the red herring. And abortion will actually work to the favor of every progressive state. Because any college-educated woman then decides, I'm not going to live in Georgia. I'm not going to live in Mississippi. I'm going to go live in California or Washington State or Washington, D.C.
Right, right. Dr. Gupta, my last question, something that both of us work on, and I thought it would be unjust to not touch on this, is the foreign policy agenda of Donald Trump. I don't want to get into into a foreign policy analysis or a deconstruction of how Donald Trump does diplomacy. That's for another conversation altogether. But what I want to know from you is, how do the American people look at 4 years of Donald Trump's diplomacy, in terms of Donald Trump being a very different kind of a president,
Yeah.
when it comes to, let's say, Pax Americana, folding down American presence or retrenching American presence from around the world. So how do the American people look at this?
Look, there's two parts to this. Part number one is Donald Trump ran on a very different platform than the rest of the Republican Party. Remember, there were 17 people who ran for president on the Republican side. 16 of them said the Iraq War was a great war. So little Marco Rubio, low energy Jeb, and my personal favorite, lying Ted Cruz, all went and said, Iraq War is the greatest war ever. Donald Trump said it was a big fat mistake. The only Republican to date on record to have said this. And the enlisted in America, the Jawans, loved him for saying that, because they have said repeatedly, we were the cannon fodder for Barack Obama and George W. Bush. Donald Trump said, I will take you out of wars. He wants to shut down Afghanistan. He's pulling troops out of Germany. He's moving all this back. And this is quite popular amongst working class America. The other thing is, the people who talk Pax Americana don't understand that America is running out of money. To do Pax Americana, you have to go back to 1945 and the Marshall Plan, or 1947 and the Marshall Plan, when America was 50% of global GDP. America is not 50% of global GDP. America borrows a lot of money from countries like China, Japan, so on. And, they buy treasury bills, all this. Today, as things stand, Angshuman, the American defense budget is around $740 billion. And then there's the veterans budget, which is the pensions for veterans plus healthcare for veterans. That is $220 billion. For next year, they want $243 billion. And you know why that? When I first joined the Air War College, the veterans bill used to be $4 or $5 billion. Now, tell me, why did it increase 50-fold or 60-fold? The answer is very simple. Young people who went to Iraq and Afghanistan in their 20s are now in their 40s. And let's say you lost an arm in Afghanistan or you lost a leg in Iraq. At 25, you were in peak physical condition. What happens with medical care is, and you've seen this with your parents and your grandparents, that if they were spending 1 rupee on their healthcare when they were 25, they're spending 2 rupees when they're 40, they're spending 4 rupees when they're 60. With each 20 years, or with every 20 years, your healthcare expenses double. And that is what is starting to happen now. And the good thing that happened for America was, because its medical system for the military was so good, America only had 5,000 casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan. It had 58,000 dead in Vietnam. It had, 38,000 in Korea. This time it only had 5,000, but it had 50,000 people with serious medical conditions, plus nobody knows how much PTSD. Okay, so the problem is, where are you going to fund Pax Americana from? Nobody wants to pay taxes. You want to buy all these fancy weapons, which cost a lot of money, and you want to go all around the world. Trump, that way, the foreign policy, take out the rhetoric, take out all the, my nuclear button is bigger than yours and all that pseudo-sexual stuff, but look at what the foreign policy is. And I always tell people this, Trump is not an extremist. I'm not a Trump fan, but on foreign policy, you have to give him credit. He's not an extremist. He hasn't started a major war. So what Biden will do is Biden wants to go back to the past as the future. So reinvigorate NATO, reinvigorate other things, join the climate change treaty, start negotiations with Iran. But really, the ability to do Pax Americana is going to be difficult. And I'll add one last thing here, because this is sort of, if you look at NATO, NATO talks big. You call a NATO ambassador or military attaché to peace and conflict studies, they'll talk big about how NATO's global military role is there. Ask them if you can actually do it. And the real reason is, one, there's only about 4 or 5 countries in NATO who meet the 2% of GDP requirement. The United States, Britain, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Greece. Look, Greece's GDP is 0, so I don't know how you get 2% of 0. I leave that to the Greeks. France, no. Germany, no. Netherlands, no. Italy, no. And each of these countries is going to put a lot more money into healthcare in the coming years. Because, when the Italian healthcare system collapsed, they called Brussels and the EU and said, help us. And Brussels couldn't do anything. So everybody in the EU has learned a lesson there. So Pax Americana was America, Japan, Europe. Well, Europe's gone. The Japanese, again, it's going to be interesting to see how much money they can spend. They're a very old population, as you and I both know. Old people need healthcare. Young people don't. India is a young population. So my own sense is this, that you're going to see Biden try and go back to Pax Americana, but it's not going to be easy. And in Trump's case, the Trump foreign policy comes across as America first, isolationist. But at another level, it was also pragmatic. You couldn't do all this anymore. So let's see. I mean, it's a week from now. So if you like, we can have another conversation after we both find out, because I honestly do not know who's going to win.
Right.
And I'll end by saying this. In July of 2016, I gave a talk in Delhi, and they asked me, who's going to win? And I said, 51% Hillary, 49% Trump. And everybody in Delhi was shocked. They said, you think it'll be that close? I said, oh yeah, it'll be that close. Now, if I had turned it the other way, I would have been a genius, but I didn't. I, like everybody else, thought it was going to be Hillary, but I thought Trump would. This time around, I'm saying the same thing. 51-49, it's going to be very close. But this time, I'm not going to predict a winner. This time, I'm going to keep my mouth shut.
Right. So you're not going to tell us who's the 51?
No, I'm not going to. I will put this very differently. I started life as a sports journalist.
Right.
And the thing with the sports journalist is you can always claim, oh, the Indians are going to win the World Cup because they're so good.
Yeah.
And then they lose the World Cup. Nobody says, oh, Kishore Bhimani was an awful commentator because he said India would win and Australia won.
Yeah.
You still love Kishore Bhimani. Now, as a political analyst, you can't do that because people remember you and laugh at you. So I'm going to try and protect what little reputation I have on this one and say that it would be arrogant for me to predict a winner. But will it be close? Yes. But everything else I've said is important. And especially this, the future belongs to millennials and Generation Z. You think about this, you've got a 78-year-old man and a 74-year-old man. Neither of them reflect the future.
Absolutely.
And at least the good thing about Biden is he says, I'm going to hold this for one term and pass it on to you.
Okay.
So, and there is even a possibility that he stays president for 2 years or 3 years and then says, you know what? I'm 81. I want to go play with my grandchildren. Kamala Harris, you become the the president. And then, of course, India has real trouble because, had Kamala Harris's father been white and had Kamala Harris been mother been Gujarati or Punjabi, she would have been deeply loved in India. I think because her father is Jamaican and her mother is a Tamilian, Indians are cool to her. the Gujarati American community didn't give a lot of money to her. They gave money to Tulsi Gabbard, who I don't mind, by the way. She's actually quite intelligent. But the point I'm trying to make to you is, you may see a transition happen in a planned manner. And India needs to start thinking of how it wants to deal with this.
Right.
So, okay.
Dr. Gupta, I think we have practically covered most of the things that matter in these elections. And as you said, I hope we can have another conversation after 3rd of November. I think we have quite a few weeks ahead of us. Whosoever wins, I'm sure there's going to be a whole spectrum of analysis and speculations and of what happened and why this happened and why that did not happen. So, and I think I would also like to have a conversation with you on the foreign policy aspect of the next 4 years very soon.
Sure.
I think that's as I said, that's a topic for a whole different conversation.
But thank you. This was fun. And anytime. Okay. All right then.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.